Good afternoon. We welcome you to the 8th Annual ECA Day. We're going to start with a short video of 5 minutes while everybody's getting settled, and then we will formally open the event. So we'll turn the time over to the video and then move forward from there. Thank you.
Water and agriculture are inextricably linked. Water is essential for sustainable development, the conservation of life, and the production of food, fibers, and energy. But it is a finite and vulnerable resource. And vulnerable resource. Many human activities have damaged ecosystems, affecting the climate and hydrological cycles. We still have time to build a different future. Agriculture, together with other productive sectors, can help ensure the sustainability of water. Supplying the world with food, fibers, and energy is not enough. The situation calls for much more. The key lies in changing the paradigm of agriculture. The planet demands it, humankind will be grateful for it. Water to feed the land. In less than 40 years, the Earth's population will have reached 9 billion, with most people living in urban areas. The demand for food, fibers, and energy will have doubled. It will be up to agriculture to meet those needs. But it will have to do so in a world beset by climate change and dramatic competition for water. The big challenges for agriculture in the Americas are to make more efficient use of water, tackle the challenges posed by climate change, and contribute to the management of water resources. If they are to turn the challenges into opportunities, the ministries of agriculture must enhance their capabilities for improving the use of water in the sector. They require support with the design and implementation of policies and instruments for integrated water resources management. This will strengthen their capacity to dialogue and build consensus with other economic sectors and the international community. Agriculture in the Americas must adapt to climate change if it is to be sustainable. Water is the key to achieving that. The integrated management and rational use of the resource should be based on sound scientific principles, respecting the sovereignty of the countries, their legal frameworks, as well as the traditions and cultures of nations, communities, and indigenous peoples. It is possible to produce more with less water. Making efficient use of water in agriculture would help to alleviate the pressure on the resource, reduce environmental degradation, and improve food security. Innovation is the tool. Research is the way. Cooperation among countries is the mechanism for making it possible. improving the use of water and achieving integrated water management calls for individuals with the ability to innovate. People trained in the application of new paradigms that would bring about a competitive, sustainable, and inclusive agricultural sector. In response to the new challenges, ICA pledges to assist its member countries with the implementation of initiatives that will help to improve the use of water in agriculture and to promote integrated water management. It places at your disposal more than 70 years of history and in-depth knowledge of the agriculture and rural world of the Americas, work carried out with its feet on the ground. Water's moment has arrived. It's time to turn challenges into opportunities, to make decisions and assume commitments. The survival of humankind is at risk. Let us ensure the future. Water to feed the land.
Good afternoon. It's our pleasure on behalf of the Organization of American States and the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture to welcome you to our 8th annual ICA Day, in which we will be focusing on the theme of water, and we'll be learning a great deal today, we hope, about this theme. And we encourage you to take advantage of the opportunity to ask our distinguished panelists questions, which each of you will have an opportunity to do as we go through this day. Before we turn the time over to Ambassador De Zela, who is the Chief of Staff for Secretary General in Sousa, we wanted you to be aware that he is going to be making his remarks in Spanish. And so those of you who would like to have interpretation, there are apparatuses in back. Edmi, would you raise your hand? Thank you. Those of you, while I'm speaking here, would like to have those, please raise your hands and we will distribute those. While that's happening, let me just adjust a little bit in my own remarks and go ahead and make some remarks about this particular event, and then we'll turn the time over to the ambassador. Over the years, ICA has focused on a variety of agricultural issues that in our estimation have impact far beyond agriculture. And those issues may be food security, feeding our families. We had in 2008 a Nobel Prize laureate who spoke on the effects of climate change on agriculture, in which some of his prognostications have actually come to pass. We've talked about the theme of youth and innovation in agriculture, the importance of women, who oftentimes are neglected in terms of policies that will support their access to credit and other tools in order for them to succeed. We've also talked about the importance of small farmers, in which in this hemisphere we have some 14 million small farmers who we believe are really the keys to achieving food security going forward. We do this with the understanding that we believe that what is good for the Americas is good for the rest of the world. For as we invest in this region, it is our belief that not only do we benefit the countries themselves and the people within, but that these same countries can be a source of technical cooperation and capacity building in other countries around the world. Rather than relying on a few countries, we believe that we can create a sea change, as it were, within Latin America and the Caribbean, and reduce the amount of food imports that exist in many parts of this region, and to begin to actually produce a surplus that can be used to feed other parts of the world. We're concerned with the fact that water is an increasingly scarce resource, by view of the fact of climate change and the poor management of this. And much like all of us who go to the supermarkets and expect food to be on the shelves, we also expect to be able to turn on the tap and have the kind of water we need in the quantities that we need to meet our own needs. And the farmers believe the same thing. What we're finding, however, as we listen to the remarks today, that what we can take for granted in the past is no longer something that we can take for granted in the future. And so as we talk about water, we encourage you to think about what you can do within your own spheres of influence as you leave this meeting to continue the dialogue around this issue with those people in your countries, with those people in your organizations. We feel that this is an important event, partly because of the issue itself, but also because we believe that this venue here in Washington, D.C. is an important venue from a technical, financial, and political standpoint to influence investments and influence policies in this region. And we realize that much of the financing and investments is occurring in Africa and Asia. And it is our role today, our responsibility, to help all of us understand the importance of investing in Latin America and the Caribbean to benefit these other regions as well. It's interesting to note that late last month, the U.S. Congress approved an $8.2 billion bill to begin mapping out plans for dams, harbors, river navigation, and other projects over the next decade. It received bipartisan support. Let me repeat that. It received bipartisan support. No small feat in today's climate. So we can see that Congress can even rally around a topic as universal and as basic as water. We are very, very pleased to have with us Dr. Daniel Hillel, who is a World Food Prize laureate for 2012 for his work in micro-irrigation. He has an incredibly interesting background, and he has come to us from Israel to speak today about this important issue of water. We also would like to recognize the presence of his wife, Michal Artzi, who in her own right is very accomplished and is a maritime archaeologist and is in charge of the archaeology department of the University of Haifa. It's interesting to note that if we follow through with this agenda and if we follow through with the comments and your questions and answers, we believe really that we can have a dialogue here that should go way beyond this meeting this afternoon. Following my remarks, it's my pleasure to introduce the Chief of Staff for Secretary in Sulsa, Ambassador De Sela. And following his remarks, we're pleased to have our Deputy Director General for MICA, Mr. Lloyd Day, who is going to be representing our Director General, who is just returning from an extended trip to Europe. And so he has asked Lloyd to represent him at this event. Following Lloyd's remarks, we will then turn the time over immediately to our keynote speaker, Dr. Daniel Hillel. And then in the interest of time, we'll move very quickly to the panels. And we see that we're already raring to go, as it were. And so following Dr. Hillel's remarks, we will turn the time over to our panelists and to our moderator. Our moderator today is Dr. Margaret Ziegler, who is Executive Director of the Global Harvest Initiative. Thank you very much for being the moderator, and thank each of you for traveling from Canada, from Washington, D.C., and from Spain to be with us in the first panel. The second panel will be moderated by Kelly Witkowski. And Kelly is a climate change officer within our office here in the United States, located in Washington. And we will have what is called a lightning round. And we will have the three participants provide to each of us some prescriptive solutions, some proven ideas that we think are worthy of your contemplation and worthy of further discussion. And following the remarks of both panels, you'll have an opportunity for question and answer. Then perhaps the most difficult challenge is going to be given to Dr. Miguel Garcia, who has traveled here from Miami via Uruguay to give a summary of the events today, some of the key points, capturing those key points that he believes we should take home, and offering a few insights himself regarding the issue of water. So without further ado, we'll turn the time over to the ambassador. Thank you very much and welcome again.
Good afternoon. As it was announced, I will make my remarks in Spanish, so I'll switch to that language now. Señor Subdirector General del IICA, señor Daniel Gilel de la Universidad de Columbia, señores miembros del panel, señoras y señores. Quiero darles en esta ocasión la más cordial bienvenida a esta nueva edición, la número 55, de la Mesa Redonda de Políticas de la OEA, que en esta ocasión hemos organizado de manera conjunta con el Instituto Interamericano de Cooperación para la Agricultura. Y lo hemos organizado para tratar de un tema que es, por cierto, de singular importancia. El tema que hoy nos ocupa es agua, alimento para la tierra, y se refiere de manera fundamental a los esfuerzos del Instituto y de la OEA para apoyar a nuestros Estados miembros en la creación y consolidación de una agenda hemisférica para el uso eficiente y sostenible de los recursos hídricos en la agricultura. Con este motivo he hecho unas muy breves lecturas y estoy, por cierto, muy lejos de ser un experto en el tema, pero sí quisiera compartir con ustedes un par de ideas que han surgido a partir de estas lecturas. La primera es la siguiente. Históricamente se reconoce que la agricultura ha estado llamada a desempeñar algunas funciones fundamentales. La primera de ellas es el abastecimiento constante y diversificado de alimentos para los pobladores del mundo. Y ello se debe hacer, en segundo lugar, teniendo en cuenta la contribución que da a la sustentabilidad de los recursos naturales y al mantenimiento de la biodiversidad. Y en última instancia, de lo que se trata es también de que la agricultura debe ser un factor de desarrollo para nuestros países, mejorando la calidad de vida de los habitantes en general y de los habitantes de las zonas rurales en particular. Estas características me impactaron de manera importante y creo que era importante también compartirlas con ustedes. Y en particular, la agricultura en la región ha tenido y tiene todavía un papel de fundamental importancia en la vida de nuestros países. De alguna manera, América Latina, América del Norte, América Central han sido zonas del mundo y siguen siendo zonas del mundo donde la agricultura juega un papel central en las sociedades y ha tenido una expansión importante. Pero estos logros, este incremento, este desarrollo de la agricultura no ha sido exento de costos. Ha habido prácticas depredadoras de los suelos, hay un proceso de urbanización importante en nuestras sociedades en la mayoría de los países de la región, y por lo tanto hay una constante disminución de la cantidad de suelo disponible para la agricultura. A ello se suma el problema de la expansión demográfica mundial y, por cierto, el fenómeno al cual se hacía alusión del cambio climático, que presenta algunos retos fundamentales para la agricultura en nuestra región. Se estima que más de 50.000 millones de dólares en ingresos y más de 6 millones de hectáreas de tierras cultivables se pierden anualmente por la degradación de tierras. Estas cifras las menciono para dar una idea del tipo de desafíos que se enfrentan. Hay, por cierto, y ahí a un breve comentario sobre el tema que motiva esta reunión, un vínculo indisoluble entre la productividad agrícola y los recursos hídricos. Por cierto, un 70% del agua que se extrae en el mundo se destina a la agricultura y por lo tanto este vínculo es de importancia central. En consecuencia, el uso no sostenible de la tierra tiene un efecto directo y cada vez mayor en las incalculables pérdidas de agua, con lo cual de alguna manera se genera un círculo vicioso que nos perjudica a todos. Este escenario global nos obliga entonces a replantearnos algunas estrategias que permitan que la agricultura se adecúe a una realidad en la cual la cantidad de tierra disponible es cada vez menor, los recursos hídricos son precarios y sin embargo hay que seguir produciendo alimentos para una población creciente. Estos desafíos plantean entonces problemas que no son solo nacionales, sino que también son transnacionales y que por consiguiente hacen perfectamente legítimo y diría yo hasta indispensable que instituciones internacionales como el ICA, como la propia OEA y como otras se ocupen en profundidad de ese tema para poder ayudar en la implementación y el desarrollo de políticas públicas participativas para ocuparse de mecanismos de gestión interna de recursos hídricos, para hablar, por ejemplo, de cogestión de cuencas hidrográficas, sobre todo de las cuencas hidrográficas que son compartidas, y para manejar los conflictos que surgen cuando hay bienes escasos, como en este caso el agua. En estos últimos años, diría yo, en los últimos 50 años, la Organización de los Estados Americanos ha colaborado con sus Estados miembros para afrontar estos y otros retos y hemos trabajado en el manejo del riesgo, en la gestión de los recursos hídricos, en temas de energía, en promoción de ciudades sostenibles y de programas de desarrollo rural. Y hemos ayudado también a fortalecer la capacidad de las agencias nacionales y regionales que velan por el uso de la tierra. En fin, hemos apoyado a la promoción de una perspectiva integrada del manejo de cuencas a través de nuestro trabajo en más de una docena de cuencas transfronterizas. Hemos, por lo tanto, creo yo, puesto nuestro grano de arena. Y en consecuencia, pensamos que esfuerzos como el que se hace hoy de dedicar unas horas al estudio y discusión de un tema tan importante es fundamental y nos alegra mucho que el IICA haya querido que este diálogo se desarrolle en la sede de la Organización de los Estados Americanos como una muestra del compromiso que tenemos ambas instituciones con un tema que es de singular importancia. Por último, quiero renovar con este motivo el compromiso que tiene esta organización para avanzar en la optimización del manejo de la tierra y del agua, para continuar colaborando con el IICA en una mejor coordinación de acciones para poder dar nuestro aporte en la solución de estos problemas. Estoy seguro que, dado el altísimo nivel de los expertos y de los panelistas que nos acompañan hoy, esta será una ocasión en la cual todos quienes tenemos la suerte de poder participar en esta reunión aprenderemos mucho y seguramente se podrá lograr generar algunos aportes en la reunión de hoy que ayudarán a la población de toda nuestra región. Le quiero finalmente dar la bienvenida a la organización, decirles que están ustedes en su casa y que esperamos que todos salgan muy satisfechos al final de la jornada de hoy. Muchas gracias.
Ambassador Duzella, Dr. Hillel, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Lloyd Day. I'm the Deputy Director General of ICA. I would like to extend the greetings of ICA's Director General, Dr. Victor Villalobos, to all of you gathered here today for ICA Day 2013. I would like to extend my special thanks to the representatives of the member countries of ICA present here this afternoon and to our many partners and friends. Given that we are here in Washington, D.C., I want to thank the representatives of the State Department and of the U.S. Department of Agriculture for their 71 years of support to ICA, an institution founded by then Secretary of Agriculture Henry Wallace. The Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture, which is the specialized agency of the Inter-American System for Agriculture, engages in many activities that provide technical cooperation, innovation, and specialized knowledge to contribute to the competitive and sustainable development of agriculture in the Americas and to improve the lives of rural dwellers in member nations. Part of our work includes hosting the biannual meeting of the Ministers of Agriculture of the Americas, in which all 34 member states send representatives to discuss the critical issues of importance for the sector in the hemisphere. Argentina recently hosted this year's meeting, the theme of which was Water to Feed the Land. Given that the issue of water and agriculture is closely related to the strategic guidelines on water resources issued by the Summits of the Americas and the General Assembly of the OAS, the government of Argentina and ICA decided to promote the issue of water in the run-up to the meetings of the ministers as one of the strategic factors involved in the achievement of a competitive, sustainable, and inclusive agriculture. Water is vital to all forms of life. Yet despite being one of the most abundant compounds on Earth, it is not an infinite resource. The Americas contain 46% of the world's freshwater resources, though there is a great disparity in the distribution throughout the region. Agriculture in the hemisphere is responsible for up to 97% of the water withdrawals in some countries and follows global trends as the main consumer of water, averaging around 70% of use. Improving management of hydrological resources throughout the agricultural value chain is critical for the long-term sustainability of this water-intensive sector, especially in the face of climate change, which will alter water quantity, quality, and availability. For agriculture to continue to support food security and the livelihoods throughout this hemisphere, we need to better understand the complex dynamics of hydrological systems and develop the capacity for various actors in the food system to improve water productivity and support integrated water management processes and that consider the changing climate. In the process leading up to the meeting of the ministers in Argentina, the countries of the Americas confirmed the relevance of this issue to the overarching interrelated challenges faced by agriculture, such as climate change, access to water, distribution, as well as efficient and sustainable use of this resource and the growing demand for food and food security. A series of steps were taken to stimulate reflection and dialogue. Working with Argentina's Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock, The first involved the preparation of a technical document, Water to Feed the Land, which was presented to the Ministers of Agriculture at ICA's Executive Committee held in Mexico City in June of this year. Today, at the home of the Organization of American States and as part of the policy roundtables that the OAS organizes, we are holding our 8th annual ICA Day with the presence of distinguished water experts and representatives of important international cooperation and development agencies. This forum provides a very timely opportunity to announce to the hemisphere-wide community the decisions taken by the leaders of agriculture regarding integrated water resource management in agriculture. In particular, in their declaration, the ministers urged the donor countries to support agricultural projects in the hemisphere and the international and financing and cooperation agencies, the research centers, and the agricultural research and innovation mechanisms to foster the implementation of national and regional programs designed to increase national capabilities, innovation and technology transfer, as well as the adoption of innovative practices and products, and to share the know-how for the sustainable use of water in agriculture and the rural milieu. To that end, we are placing the declaration at your disposal with the intention and hope that, as a document that reflects the political will of a significant sector involved in the development of the countries of the Americas, it will lead to follow-up actions being adopted in support of projects related to water in agriculture. ICA stands ready to take part in coordinated efforts with other regional, hemispheric, and global institutions to assist the OAS member countries with the design and implementation of national strategies, programs, and projects aimed at making more efficient and sustainable the use of water in agriculture. It would be an honor to share the valuable experience that we have acquired with the sister countries of the Americas. ICA's representative to the United States, David Hatch, Dr. Hillel, and I all come from a place called California, the so-called Golden State. One of the most important pillars of the California economy is agriculture. And that sector is fueled by the delivery of water up and down the Central Valley through its vast river systems and the man-made California aqueduct, which brought life to the Central Valley. According to David and my former boss, the Secretary of Agriculture of the United States and once California as well, Secretary Ann Veneman, California produces more wealth in a single year than all the gold of the gold rush of the 1840s and 1850s that brought so many people to the Golden State. This water also fuels the ever-increasing human population in America's largest economy. In California, water is gold, water is life, and water is a resource that is finite and must be managed with care and precision. As we prepare to listen to the presentations this afternoon, we encourage you to engage in the question and answer sessions and with ICA here in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere with your ideas of how we can work together. On behalf of the Director General of ICA and myself personally, I'd like to thank you for taking part in this 8th ICA Day, and we look forward to working with you on water and the myriad of issues in agriculture. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to address this august gathering in this marvelous hall. If I were a politician, which I'm not, thank you so much. If I were a politician, I would see before me voters to be influenced. Being a hydrologist, what I see before me are packets of water. Forgive me for saying so, but a child born into this world is 70% by mass water. And as we grow older, we dry up a little bit. At least our humor becomes a bit drier, but we still remain more water than anything else. So let's remember that we are water. And so, I'll take off my glasses and read what I wrote. For many centuries, the standard mode of irrigation, which is the supply of water wherever it is deficient, consisted of the diversion of water from rivers via channels I'm having some difficulty, and forgive me, to level fields located in valleys. And that was the case in ancient Mesopotamia and in the Indus River Valley and in the valley of the Yellow River, and then in the United States of America and California, from whence I came, and in many other places. So much of our food production depends on water management, whether from rivers or from rainfall or snow melt, as in many rivers. The situation improved somewhat with the use of pumps when they were developed, which made possible the extraction of water and the delivery of water, both from groundwater and from rivers onto floodplains and beyond that. And so water supply and water management became essential in the development of our civilization. The problem was that water was used inefficiently, and applying excess water is more destructive than applying a deficiency of water, because it causes inevitably the accumulation of water in the subsoil, and then gradually a process of capillary rise, evaporation, enhanced evaporation, the accumulation of salts, and eventually the waterlogging and the salinization or the poisoning of land. And that has caused the demise of ancient civilizations based on water, ill management of water. In Mesopotamia, in the Indus River Valley, in the valley of the Yellow River, in many other locations, including the Central Valley of California, the Salton Sea, which resulted from the excessive application of irrigated water, and many other examples. Now, only about 40 years ago, a new approach developed to the management of water. And it now seems appropriate to review its origin and its current status, and to consider its future prospects. Fittingly, this revolution in water management took place in the Middle East, the region where irrigation first began. However, the initiators were themselves newcomers to the practice, who were able to turn the disadvantage of their inexperience to the advantage of a fresh approach. The new mode of irrigation started in Israel within 2 decades of its birth in the middle of the 20th century, as the nascent state needed to develop its agriculture under extreme conditions of water scarcity and capital constraints. Having participated in this seminal development, I can describe it directly. It was a rare and heady experience for a young scientist, and believe me, it doesn't seem so right now, but I was a young scientist many decades ago. It was a heady experience for a young scientist to be present and active at the birth of an innovation that had both fundamental and practical importance, and that has since proved to be globally applicable. I refer to the advent and evolution of high-frequency, low-volume, partial area irrigation techniques, including drip, trickle, and microspray irrigation. What began as a re-examination of the guiding principles of irrigation management eventually led to a complete change of paradigm, the inversion of the traditional premises and an elaboration and widespread adoption of an entirely new set of technologies. Conventional approaches based of irrigation management, presumably bolstered by the research done in the early decades of the 20th century in California and elsewhere, was based on the hypothesis that soil moisture remains equally available to crops until plant roots deplete the moisture to some residual low value, which was called the permanent wilting point. In practice, this hypothesis justified a regimen of infrequent irrigation designed to wet the soil periodically to its maximal field capacity, and then to let crop roots deplete soil moisture almost to the wilting point of the plants before irrigating once again to replenish the soil moisture reserve. That conventional irrigation scheme consisted of repeated short episodes of watering followed by extended periods of soil moisture extraction by crops. Accordingly, the root zone was periodically wetted to saturation, a maximal content that deprived the plant roots of aeration. Plant roots need to respire, they must breathe the way we do. And so excessive water deprives plants of that physiological imperative. And then the soil was allowed to dry gradually to a minimal water content that subjected plants to increasing stress. That was the only way to irrigate. Practical limitations on the frequency of irrigation by conventional methods of surface flooding, furrow, and even of sprinkler irrigation made it difficult to test alternative strategies to avoid such wide fluctuations by establishing and maintaining an intermediate optimal level of soil moisture and aeration continuously. The low-frequency mode of irrigation seemed to make economic sense because most of the conventional systems were more expensive to run at high frequency, lower delivery rate, and longer duration. For example, where the cost of portable tubes was a major consideration, it was economical to make the least amount of metal tubing, portable metal tubing, generally of aluminum, serve the greatest area by shifting these tubes successively to as many tracts of land as possible before returning to the same tract for the repeated irrigation. The question was, therefore, how dry can the soil become before crops experience a significant reduction of yield? So a hypothesis developed of undiminished soil moisture availability to crops until plants are just about to wilt. And that was taught in several universities, in many universities, as a truism. And when I was taught irrigation at first, I too heard this business of equal availability until the plants were just about ready to wilt. It was questioned, that hypothesis, but there was no way of refuting it. And then something happened. It became possible to deliver water continuously and cheaply by the advent, the unexpected advent, of a byproduct of the petroleum industry called plastics, polyethylene and so on, tubes that were low cost and could be perforated or fitted with little emitters that could drip the water slowly, like spoon feeding a baby, little by little, continuously. And a new paradigm emerged. The contradiction of the old theory became too obvious to ignore, and it was proven that rather than periodic irrigation, continuous irrigation, like spoon feeding a baby, as I said, that is best for crops. And we need not saturate the soil and deprive the roots of oxygen. We can keep the soil unsaturated continuously at a steady state. Now, the orthodox irrigators thought that that was foolish. They thought that irrigating frequently or continuously would waste water and salinate the soil, but it proved to be wrong. And it's very interesting that the practitioners who developed this method were not old-time farmers, experienced irrigators. They were completely newcomers to the art and to the science of irrigation. It happened in Israel in the first few decades after its establishment. And lo and behold, it coincided with, as I said before, the development of low-cost plastic tubing that could be perforated or fitted with emitters with pressure control. And then they discovered something very interesting. They, and I was among them, discovered that we can inject into the water the nutrients, the exact concentration, optimal concentration and composition of nutrients and pesticides necessary to enhance growth from the moment of germination and into the maturation of annual crops, and even more so to perennial crops. And so that turned out to be a revolution in the art and in the science and in the economy of irrigation. And it is this that I wish to herald here and bring to your attention. So, I have pictures to show you, anyone, but I cannot show them here. Anyone wishes, I have literature with me, which I'm willing and quite willing to share. If you give me your addresses, I'll mail them to you. So later on, the system was developed further and fitted to the specific needs of different crops, different climates, different soil types, the injection not only of nutrients but of pesticides and of even hormonal additions that are necessary specifically for each type of crop. Now, where the irrigation water is somewhat brackish, the continuous supply of fresh water to the roots ensures that the salts do not accumulate progressively. And this is a great problem in most irrigated areas. Most irrigated areas subject to the classical mode of excessive irrigation, either by flooding or by furrowing or even by sprinkling crops, what eventually caused salinization. That was the demise of ancient civilizations based on irrigation, and it is a great problem, and still is a great problem in areas that practice the traditional mode of irrigation. So, given its potential advantages, drip-trickle irrigation is a great advantage, is a great advance, and yet it is not a panacea. Competent operators can achieve high efficiency with such systems, but incompetent or careless operators can be just as wasteful as with conventional systems. The narrow orifices of drip emitters are prone to clogging by sand particles or by precipitating salts. And so the fact that only a fraction of the soil volume is wetted is also a problem, because many crops can thrive when water is supplied to no more than 50% of the soil volume, but they become very vulnerable to even a temporary stoppage of the water supply or disruption of the water supply. Apart from the technical problems associated with installing and maintaining, carefully maintaining, expertly maintaining the irrigation system in perfect working condition, there is the problem of ensuring the steady supply of water throughout the growing season, continuously. And that's not always easy to do. This technology is advantageous when it's properly operated. It fails when it's introduced arbitrarily into developing countries. Large, elaborate, and expensive systems, including automated pumps and self-flushing filters and pressure regulators and metering valves and fertilizer injectors and precision-calibrated emitters, all of these are sometimes imported and installed in the hope of achieving instant modernization, but they're all too prone to failure for lack of maintenance and spare parts. It takes expertise and availability of the equipment, of the specialized equipment. And so, in many developing countries where it was hastily introduced, these systems had become white elephants, idle monuments to hasty progress, relying on ill-adapted technology that is unsuited to the social structure and the means of small-scale family farm units. So a major task of our time is to apply the benefits of science to alleviate the plight of poverty-stricken societies in semi-arid regions, particularly in the drought-prone areas of sub-Saharan Africa and other places such as Southeast Asia, Central Asia, and parts of South America. Efficient and sustainable utilization of soil and water resources is an essential aspect of the task facing us. It is not an easy task. There's no one system that fits all. There are principles which need to be adapted. So, once again, I wish to emphasize that high-frequency, low-volume, partial area, drip-trickle irrigation is not so much a product as it is a concept, and its application in practice is not necessarily depends on adaptation, not necessarily on expensive equipment, but on adaptation tailored to the low capital circumstances of developing countries. It can permit downscaling to fit the needs of small-scale farmers. It does not necessarily depend on grand regional schemes and the importation of prepackaged commercial hardware systems. It can be applied universally, not readily, not easily, but the principles are important rather than the product. I'm not here to promote a product. I'm here to encourage the adaptation of principles of high efficiency in the utilization of water and of land and of crops and of the people who feed humanity, the farmers. Thank you. I salute you with a glass of water. Are there any questions or comments or refutations? No. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Hillel, again, for your words of encouragement and insight. We're going to head now into the panel section, and my name is Margaret Ziegler. I'm the Executive Director of the Global Harvest Initiative, which is based here in Washington, D.C. Global Harvest Initiative, or GHI, is a private sector policy voice. We are comprised of 6 member companies. These include Accenture, DuPont, Elanco, John Deere, Monsanto, and IBM. And we are primarily focused on improving global agricultural productivity. And we collaborate very closely with not only our member companies, but also with 10 NGOs and universities that we consider our consultative partner organizations. And we're very delighted that ICA is one of our consultative partners. And we feel strongly that the Latin American countries and the Latin American hemisphere has a strong role to play, not only in feeding farmers and the people of the Americas, but actually providing a breadbasket for the entire planet. I just returned from China, where I spent several days interacting with the Chinese Ministry of Agriculture and OECD. The focus of our meeting was really how to improve productivity in China. And one of the questions that came up was, with the growth in not only China, but in the Asian region of the middle class, there's going to be a coming demand for food that most likely will not be supplied within the Asian region. And increasingly, the Asian economies and the fast-growing countries, particularly of China, India, and other parts of East Asia, are looking more and more to Latin America as a potential breadbasket. And it was quite interesting to hear the perspective of the Chinese Ministry of Agriculture and many of the other entities in the room with their real increase of interest in the potential of Latin America as a breadbasket and trading partner to meet the future coming demand for food and agricultural products. So the Global Harvest Initiative is very pleased today to partner with ICA and OAS to really highlight the potential that exists in the Latin American region for improving productivity of agriculture. And we're here today to really think about how we can do that, growing more food with less inputs. And that's one of the things that the Global Harvest Initiative has focused on since our formation. I do have a few of our reports here in the back of the room. You're welcome to take them. We serve as a resource to policymakers and to NGOs and to other private sector and governmental agencies on this issue of agricultural productivity. So here we're going to dig a little bit more deeply into these issues today with a distinguished panel of experts that can provide a lot more information on water and sustainable water use. So I'm going to briefly introduce them, and we'll hear from each of them for approximately 8 minutes each. And then we were going to have a little bit of dialogue with you in the room, some questions and answers. So as we've entitled this panel, the perspectives on challenges in a changing landscape, I'm going to give each one of the panelists about 8 minutes again to share their perspective. And then I'm going to follow up with just a few questions and then turn to the audience for a chance to hear from all of you if you have questions. Some of the information we've been talking about is quite daunting. The idea that 70% of all fresh water that's withdrawn is used for agriculture. And with climate change impacting on the availability of fresh water and competing uses for urban uses of water, I think that what we're hoping to focus on today is how can we grow more crops with less drops? How can we get more productivity out of our agricultural production? We have 3 excellent panelists, and first I'm going to give you a bit of information about Chandra Matramutu, sitting in the center. He's currently the Dean of the Faculty of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences and the Associate Vice Principal of McGill University in Canada. He's also the James McGill Professor in the Department of Bioresource Engineering. He has a background in agricultural engineering and was the founding director of the Brace Center for Water Resources Management, and more recently he has founded the McGill Institute of Global Food Security. He's made outstanding contributions to the field of water and food security, both in Canada and around the world. On my immediate left is Max Campos, who is the Chief of Integrated Water Resources Management at the OAS. He's responsible for promoting and coordinating regional activities on water and climate, peace and democracy within all countries of the Americas. He has an academic background in earth sciences and meteorology, and his research, publications, and initiatives have helped guide the development of the agenda on climate change in Latin America. He contributes to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Special Reports on Impacts of Climate Change, and is a lead author on those reports. He's also coordinated the Latin American chapter for the 3rd assessment report on impacts and adaptation. And finally, we will hear from Joan Girona, who is the director of the Water Use Efficiency Program for the Catalonia Agri-Food Technological Research Institute in Spain, or IRTA. IRTA's mission is to contribute to improving and boosting competitiveness and fostering sustainable development in the agri-food sector. He has studied horticultural and agricultural science in both the US and Spain and is a specialist on irrigation, water management, and crop water requirements. So I think we're going to start out first, I believe, with Max. You'll go first, and then we'll hear from Chandra, and then we'll finish with Joan. So Max, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I believe you may have a few slides as well.
I only have one slide, but let me start by thanking IC and of course our Organization of American States to make this possible, which I consider it is a very important, and it's a very important moment because we are in the process of the preparation for the next World Water Forum, and I think this alliance between IC and OES through its Secretary of Integral Development and Sustainable Development, the Department of Sustainable Development, is very important in order to provide some type of orientations to our member states in the Americas, not only the Latin American countries, but the whole Americas in this process that also includes ministers, presidents, parliamentarians, mayors, and so on. So for us, it's very important to have a clear view of this important issue for the Americas, as you just mentioned, relating water and agriculture. And then I would like to start by mentioning some of the things that we are doing here at the OAS regarding water, or at least that we have been doing for 50 years now on that. But the main aspect, I think, that leads us into the agenda today is that we have to realize that population is the main driver for environmental degradation in some way. So once we realized that, we could quote the War Assessment Report when they said that the Americas is the only continent in positive regarding water and population. So it is backing up what you just mentioned, the land of opportunities. But these opportunities are tied with many other factors like innovation, technology, and above all, governance. And that's what we have been trying to do at the Organization for American States, is to build through the different elements of governance, strengths in the member states, all from the United States to Patagonia and Argentina, passing through the Caribbean, in a sense that all these different elements could be strengthened in such a way that the countries has an opportunity to try to address this challenge. So one of the main things that we have done for the last 50 years is to dealing with these challenges. And many of them are basically the same for all the world. One of them is the exponential contamination of water. And this is something that is happening here in Panama, in the United States, or in China. So that's a big concern, how to reuse all this water. And this is where technology and innovation becomes a very important factor, or the use efficiency, as Daniel has been mentioning very, very specifically in his address. The other issue, which is very important regarding the challenges that we are facing in the Americas, is the decrease in financial investment for maintenance and new hydraulic infrastructure in the Americas. And that's very important. And I know that this could be very well tied to financial crisis, to readdressing the issues in another way, the reducing contributions from some countries or investments into another ones, or probably the new role of the private sector into that. So that's another important effect that could have in this equation of the agriculture. And of course, we all have mentioned, and we have to keep on mentioning the factor of climate change and current variability and the effects on water supply. And that is very important. But every time that we talk about climate change, we only think on water, only think on rainfall. But there are so many elements related to this global warming and climate change that also has an impact on agriculture. Temperature. Temperature is so important for the plants to grow. Relative humidity, that's another factor so important regarding pests and plagues and the innovation necessary on the private sector in order to have better agrochemists or better management also of these agrochemists. The wind is so important because the wind pattern is what they make the full change regarding geography, temperature, and water. And so I think that for the plants, it's very important also to consider this changing, what I would call it the water supply size, but including all these elements of climate. And of course, we cannot avoid talking about the demand and how this grows and put a stress on the supply that we have so far. So I think that for 50 years, the Organization for American States has been working with the member states in so many projects that has been able to identify specific cases. I remember, for example, the case of the San Francisco River in Brazil, which has been a huge project that has bring irrigation for many areas of Brazil. I remember projects in another scale, like in the Trifínio region between El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, which are very important, not because of the scale, but because of what has been learned and reproduced as lessons in this area. But what if we have these global to local challenges? What is the scenario that we have in our countries in order to work with this challenge or to overcome this challenge? One problem that we have is that very weak institutions. We still in the Americas, we still have very weak institutions. Institutions that were created for one reason but has been modified in time, that cannot come now up front and try to transform these challenges into opportunities. We have, in many cases, obsolete or fragmented legislation regarding water. In many cases, they have been catching up with new water laws. But in some other countries, legislations are still fragmented. And so we have a legislation for erosion, soil erosion, we have a legislation for hydropower, we have a legislation for something else. That, of course, they contribute to the fact of water governance, but in some way they're still a little bit obsolete and fragmented. One of the main problems in the Americas is not having an articulated participation of the civil society, especially when we talk about private sector, when we talk about the academia, when we talk about governments, and especially when we talk about youth. And this is something that through the efforts of the Organization of American States and through the different structures we have been trying to build a lot, is how to include civil society as a whole into these processes of building and transforming the challenges into the opportunities. And of course, this is some of the main contributions that we have been doing for the last 50 years, is to provide transparency in the management and information sharing and accountability, which is crucial and fundamental in the issue of transforming challenges into the opportunities. So when we talk about the Americas, it's about a fragile governance. So that's the reason when we talk about how to transform these challenges into opportunity, we have to pay attention that integrated water resources management as a mechanism for promoting development or for maintaining the development that, as we know it, needs a strong investment in governance too. Later on, probably we could have the opportunity to touch some other aspects, but and probably one of the more important that I don't want to miss is the important relationship between peacekeeping or peace building or good relationship between neighboring countries, now that we recognize also that most of the water that we have for overcoming these challenges regarding the nexus water and agriculture is in our borders, and the lack of understanding that we still have among countries, communities, at the regional and the global level. I would like to stop here.
Thank you, Max. Kept within your time. So, Chandra, share a bit with us.
Margaret, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me say what an honor it is for me to be here this afternoon, and I wish to thank the ICA office here in Washington and also the OAS office for the invitation to be here to say a few words about some of the views that I see going forward in the area of water management. And I'm going to speak specifically in the context of Latin America and the Caribbean, given the audience that we have here today. First of all, to put a few concepts on the table. And the first concept that I want to put forth is the whole aspect of the spatial and temporal variability of precipitation, because our failure to properly understand that variability in space and in time will lead us to implement in the wrong kinds of practices and decisions with respect to sustainable water resources management. And the reality is that the spatial and temporal variability, particularly of precipitation and runoff, has a very direct impact on water availability, water use, and water uptake in agriculture. And I want to also put that in the context of a change in climate as we go forward. Because Latin America and the Caribbean portray two extremes with respect to precipitation and runoff. We're all too familiar with the impacts of heavy precipitation, high-intensity rainfalls, and runoff that lead to damage by floods. We've seen the impacts of hurricanes, for example, and the frequency of impacts of hurricanes and high rainfalls and runoff on destruction of agricultural land and the loss of crops, an immediate impact with respect to food security in Latin America and the Caribbean. And then we see the complete opposite end of the spectrum. We witness parts of Latin America and the Caribbean, particularly in Central America, where the extremity of drought also impacts crop production food availability, and food security. And so while we say that there is an abundance of water in the region, and sure enough there is, what that masks is this variability of precipitation and runoff in time and in space. And unless we're able to address that and deal with it, I think we will continue to see very negative impacts with respect to food security and food availability. The other point that I wanted to bring up on variability of precipitation and runoff is that it has a very major impact on the soil reservoir of water. And we need to be able to manage that reservoir of soil water. If we can manage that reservoir of soil water adequately for crop productivity, then we're able to deal with some of the points that Dr. Hillel raised before about salinity and waterlogging. And one of the things that we have failed to do, I think, in science and technology around water and agricultural water management is to put our hands very firmly on how we manage that soil water reservoir. That is the biggest source of water available to us. And sometimes we immediately think about reservoirs and dams. Yes, we do need reservoirs and dams. We do need storage for exactly the reasons that I've mentioned, that when we have floods and high rainfall events, we need reservoirs and dams to be able to capture that runoff to prevent flooding downstream, and then to use it during the dry season for crop production, for irrigation, for crop production. But what we always neglect far too often is how we manage the soil water reservoir itself. And that is something that I think needs much further attention, which I'll elaborate on in the presentation. Let me also put the concept forward in terms of water management and watershed management with respect to what I call the biomes of the earth. And the earth has several biomes. We think of forests, mountains, grasslands, wetlands, deserts, and drylands. And each one of these areas has a very unique challenge with respect to water management. And Latin America and the Caribbean portrays every single one of these biomes. And they each have a very special characteristic in how we manage water for food production and food security. Let me emphasize here this afternoon the whole point about the drylands as a biome, because there are approximately 7 million square kilometers of arid and semi-arid drylands in Latin America and the Caribbean. That's home to something like about 100 million people in the Americas. And when we think about that population, it's a population that's one of the most disadvantaged in terms of access to resources and proper utilization of resources to be able to deal with water security, water shortages, water excesses, and food security. Now, it's projected by the year 2050 that this whole semi-arid tropics around the world could increase by about 11%. The area of the semi-arid tropics growing by about 11% with projections from climate change models. And that will obviously, part of that will be particularly in Central America. The Central American countries will see the biggest expanses of that area. There are some characteristics of that biome of the drylands that one also needs to pay attention to in terms of management practices, because those drylands, farmers and the people who live in those areas are very vulnerable, because those drylands are some of our most degraded lands. They have very poor soil fertility. The topsoil, the organic matter has been mined from those soils, and the topsoil has been lost by erosion, by deforestation, and there has been very little replenishment of soil fertility and soil productivity in those areas. There are also areas that will see some of the largest increases in temperature, air temperature. Temperature increases that could probably be as high as 4 degrees Celsius. And many, as a matter of fact, most of our C3 and C4 crops that we currently cultivate commercially do not have the ability to withstand those types of temperature increases. And so what I want to signal right now, and I will come back to it later, is the whole area of crop genetic improvement to deal with temperature changes and this aspect of spatial and temporal variability of precipitation. Now, what do we do in terms of going forward? I want to put this now into the broader context of conservation agriculture. And for me, conservation agriculture encompasses the whole principle of an integrated systems approach to the sound management, the sustainable management of water, soil, carbon, and fertilizer. And I put emphasis on all four, not on one alone, because I believe that with the biome of the drylands, with climate change, both in terms of precipitation, moisture, and also temperature, we need to look at all three, and as I alluded to before, with respect to crop productivity. What does this mean? It means that more emphasis will have to be placed on mitigation strategies rather than adaptation. We need to look at methods that will sequester carbon, reduce greenhouse gas emissions in these drylands of Latin America and the Caribbean. And we need to start to look at how we can improve soil productivity through better usage of microorganisms in the soil. What are some of the mycorrhizae fungi that are naturally inherent in the soils of Latin America and the Caribbean, for which there can be bioprospecting to help to increase organic matter and improve soil-water relations for the uptake of water? And also, what is the role of biochar? And I think there's an immense role for biochar in some of these areas to improve soil structure, add organic matter, and improve water and nutrient uptake. Let me close in the remaining minutes with crop biotechnology, because I believe that that is an area that we cannot ignore. Crop biotechnology has an immense future in terms of genetic improvement of crops to deal with drought resistance and salt resistant crop varieties. And today, when we know so much about the genomic sequencing of our major crop species, and when we have modern tools such as marker-assisted selection of crop varieties, I think it is imperative that we start to use these tools in terms of genetic improvement of our crop varieties, which we have been doing for decades. But now, with the tools that we have and the genomics that is the tools and genomics that is so powerful in our labs, we can advance much faster to be able to provide the kinds of crop biotechnology going forward for the future. So, thank you very much.
So we've moved a bit from the broad scope of regional policy and the need for integrated regional policy down to kind of some more of the conservation approaches and technologies with crop improvements and soil improvements. And now we'll hear a little bit more from Joan about your experience in Catalonia at your institute and perhaps some of the specific things you're doing with dryland cultivation and horticulture.
Thanks, Margaret. I will stand up because I will illustrate my presentation with some slides. I can see that. Huh? First, good afternoon, and I want to thank to the organizers the opportunity they have been me to be here this night. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here today. I'm used to start these kind of talks saying that I will summarize the main concepts in 90 minutes. Today I have 8 minutes and perhaps now a little less. Then what I will do is just to summarize in main 9 ideas that I want just to comment to you. The first one is that world population increases. And this is important. The forecast said that world population will increase or will arrive in 2015 about 9.1 billion of persons. Today data shows that this increase goes faster than what we thought. And to feed these populations, we will need between 20-something to 80% more food. FAO states that we need 70% more food to feed this population. Then this increase in population will lead with a very important increase in fruit demand. The second aspect is that water is needed to produce fruit. We cannot produce fruit without water. And this is something that the general people, that the people of this world, they don't know. They just ignore. This water may come from rainfall in rain-fed crops or with irrigation water that we supply to the crops. But as it shows this graph, if we want to increase yield, we will need more water. Let me see if I find my glasses. I don't know where I left them. Okay, up here. The first idea I want just to share with you is that worldwide fresh water useful for irrigation is almost used. Once more, the forecastings about how much water we will need in the future just to feed our population says that we need between 60% to almost 130% more water than the water that we use today. If we don't change our habits how to use water. The problem is that the threshold for water to be used to produce fruits is almost finished. We are almost using the maximum amount. The thresholds and the red lines are mainly environmental water demands. We can use more water to produce fruit. And with this we have the climate change, and it has been a state, increasing temperatures, variability in rainfall, and additionally that we were using some water just to irrigate other crops, biofuels and other crops. And then we will have less water to produce this increase in food demand that we have. Under these circumstances, irrigation efficiency has to improve. We have to follow what the FAO says about this. We have to produce more crop per drop. And mainly, water use efficiency is a productivity index. It's how many kilos of biomass we are able to produce by each cubic meter of water we use. And in order to increase this water use efficiency, technology has to be introduced. Dr. Hillel explained it clearly, the kind of circumstances and management details. And I want to show you only an example about maize, how to grow maize with different irrigation systems. In this case, we use 4 different irrigation systems: flood irrigation, sprinkler, drip, and drip with a specific agricultural management to improve the system. And here we can see first in orange the flood irrigation system productivity, about 10 tons, and the sprinkler in green, and the drip in blue and yellow, about 15 tons. We move from one system to the other, and we increase from 10 to 15 tons the productivity. How much irrigation water they use? From about 10,000 cubic meters from hectare, the flood irrigation, to a little less than 6,000 cubic meters, the drip irrigation system. And the most important, what was the efficiency of these systems? How many kilos of maize we produce in each one of the different irrigation systems? Here you may see the numbers, from 1.1 kilos per cubic meters using flooding systems to 2.6 kilos of maize for each cubic meter when we use drip irrigation. That is an increase about 250%. However, the most important increase is not because we have a system that has the ability to produce this increase in water use efficiency, is how the system is managed by irrigators. And when I say irrigators, I mean water managers, technicians, consultants, advisors, and of course, the growers. Just to illustrate this part, I'll take an example of apple. The FAO organization states that to produce one apple, we need 70 liters of water. From our experiments in flooding irrigation, we conclude that we use 55 liters of irrigation waters to produce one apple, plus the water that comes from rainfall, that we evaluate between 12 and 16 liters. Then these numbers, they are very close to what the FAO organization says. But just let's start with these 55 liters. If we give to a farmer a drip irrigation, and we don't explain to the farmer how to use the drip irrigation, they produce apples with 49 liters. Yeah, there is a reduction of water used, but there is a small reduction. If we explain to the farmers how to use the system, as we increase the knowledge that they have how to use the system, we can move to 28, 24, or even 70 liters. If you realize we have an improvement about 11% only because we use different systems, but we have an improvement about 65% extra if we explain to the farmers how to use this water. Consequently, the next topic, and we are arriving yet to the 7 topics, is how to educate growers. In order to educate growers, we believe that research and technology has to work very close to the growers. It's not possible to say that research or researchers will develop new technologies and growers will use, because usually they never works. We have to work together, and we have good examples. We have to work together first in process automatization, and we have a good example in using cell phones, how very complicated technology may be used for everybody. We need to introduce this idea in using irrigation, but also we have to improve the level of knowledge on how to manage irrigation by the growers. Our experience is that when we join technology and farmers and knowledge, the benefits are really very high. We have a lot of examples about this issue. For instance, only explaining growers how to better use flooding irrigation. And Dr. Hiller stated the basics. We can just wait 3 weights from one irrigation to the other because still there is some water in the soil. We can improve a lot, for instance, flooding irrigation, or using the most complicated technology with remote sensing just to analyze the variability within one plot just to apply in every specific place the water. But perhaps, the most important point, and the one that summarizes my talk, is this one. If the irrigators, they don't improve their water use efficiency, will not be able to feed their population. And I think this is important, because if we have all the technology, we have all the advances, but if we don't show to the growers, because we must remember that irrigation is controlled, is managed by growers. If they don't know how to manage water, we will not be able to feed the world population. And this is all what I wanted to explain in different aspects. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Each one of you stayed well within the 8 minutes, so we're catching up our time here. I wanted to kind of just kick off with a question, and maybe a question or two, and then I would like to open it up to the audience for your participation as well. But one of the things I think we're hearing today is we've gone a bit from the kind of the larger scale down to all the way down to the grower, the irrigator, the farmer himself or herself. What is the role of this empowerment, this ability to take information and data and package it in a way that is useful for the farmer, the irrigator, the user? What is the role of the data analytics? And we haven't talked too much about this, but each of you have hinted a little bit at it in your presentations. How can we increasingly get all of the data and information that's available out there into a format that farmers can use to make the best decisions about water use and other input use to maximize their output? Maybe you each can say a few things about this topic.
I can start if you wish. There's an enormous potential for this. There's software out there that can do that type of analytics. There's a whole package called Agripedia, which was developed with Google and the Indian Council of Agricultural Research and ICRISAT, the International Center for Crop Research in the Semi-Arid Tropics, where today with all of the images that we have that are remotely sensed in terms of land use, soil type, and crop cover, and then overlay on top of that all the weather data that we could currently get our hands on. There are now immensely powerful systems that can do just exactly that, to take projections of climate to the end of the growing season, to predict crop yield, and to come up with recommendations of fertilizer inputs through different types of imaging that can relate cover, ground cover, and color type of soils to soil quality, soil nutrient status, and even the leaves. One is able now to distinguish through leaf color what the status of plant nutrients is. So it's out there, it's available, but it is still a long way to bring it to the stage where individual farmers can use it. One still needs to do some ground truthing and have some base stations that you can relate some of this remotely sensed data to a few test spots to be able to bring it to use by farmers. But it is getting easier, it's getting better. And I think what is very important now for a project that I visited a couple of years ago in Mali, that's funded by the Canadian government, is where farmers come together in groups and they become their own extension agents, where they look at these maps, look at their crop yields, and look at their neighbors' maps and crop yields, and they can start to figure out among themselves what each farmer did to be able to get higher yields. And I think that is one of the most powerful parts of it, where farmers themselves can become their own extension agents to be able to take that technology out to their individual fields.
Yes, I agree with the idea.
Here? I agree with the idea that has enormous potentiality, this. But my concern is mainly that from what I'm seeing, this has enormous potentiality mainly for growers, for managers, but I never seen a large amount of growers using this technology. For instance, in different parts of the world, there are several organizations that provide weather data used to schedule irrigation. The question is only this, which could be the principle or one basic used to improve irrigation. The question is how many growers they use this information. For instance, in our area, only about 2% of the growers, they check this data. I don't know how many they use the data. And from the figures that we have, for instance, from California, we know that less percent of the growers, they check the data, the weather data, just to schedule irrigation. Then my concern, once again, is not about the technology that we have, is the perception that the growers has that irrigation is too complicated and better just to put water, because if we put water with a certain frequency, we will crop more than if we don't irrigate. The question to me is that we have just to let them know, the growers, that it's possible to increase yields, that it's not so difficult, and in this sense, I believe that all the people that we work, from researchers to technicians to enterprises, we have to work in order to make easier for growers how to manage water. If not, we will have a lot of technology, we will have a lot of information, but I'm not seeing growers using this information.
The extension of that information.
Exactly.
New models for that extension will really need to be developed and be locally contextualized.
Exactly.
Max, do you want to add a little bit more to the conversation and perhaps from a policy perspective?
I would like to add a few comments on that. More from my background that on the OAS, the specifics of that. And I started my field in earth science and climate and meteorology working for an agrometeorology project. And that's how I developed curiosity about climate. And I worked for so many years in what field called phenology. So I went for many days and for some years to some plots of potatoes to measure how they grow day by day based on the environment. And I developed not only the curiosity about the science and the agriculture, but the relationship with the people that are the small farmers. This leads me to the point that what data are we talking about? This is very relative. The data that the farmers really need to improve their harvest, or the data that is part of the industry market for insurance their crops, then their market and the agreements and so on. So it is very important to see in which area can we, through these alliances that we build among institutions and among colleagues, that we are building for. There is one challenge associated to data that also we must face, is that we start taking the data that was built by the agricultural sector in the world. The first one who picked up data were the farmers for the climate. And all that we have in climate change, from the models to the data on the field, are being evolving from these farmers day by day taking all this data. So where are they now? We are missing the connectivity with the data. So we are relying too much on models, remote sensing, that needs validation on the ground. And so we are forgetting about the basics of data. This data that has been taken for several years, day by day, hour by hour, many of them, the data processing. We are losing the investments also in this area. So when we discover that we need to adapt to climate change based on robust scenarios, we have no data to prove that this is a robust adaptation policy. So I think that this issue of data is a whole debate. But I just want to bring some experience from my background on the need to come back to those experiences that the agriculture sector developed for the hydropower, for the widening of the Panama Canal, putting more water into that, because all these data are coming from this farmer sector in some point. So I would like to, to stress this as one of the crucial points that we have to see to.
Are there some questions that we can take maybe from the audience for particular panelists? I don't know if there's a microphone or a ability for someone to share microphone, or maybe you just have to speak very loudly. I don't know if there are any questions that we have for the panelists. We have about 5 more minutes. Yes, I see. Maybe just state your name and then let us know what your question is. Oh, there's the microphone.
Thanks. Yeah, my name is Peter Springer, Organization of American States, Department of Sustainable Development. Thank you very much, panelists, for your very insightful and very informative presentations. The question I have is based on the reality of the situation in the Americas. The typology of the farmer in the Americas is one that is vulnerable, that very largely not exposed to new techniques in farming, is using age-old approaches and so on. And so when we speak of education in that kind of context, I think we need to be realistic in terms of the transformation that we are seeking to achieve through education with that typology. And I raise that concern in the context of the aquapedia and so on that was raised by Dr. Madramuto. We're talking about farmers in most cases who don't have access to electricity in some cases. who've never handled a laptop or you know, and so on. So I think that is the essence of the challenge that we face. We're talking about a vulnerable group of farmers in a vulnerable industry or vulnerable endeavor. And how do we, in the face of that reality, build a concrete strategy to address that group?
Taking this question, thinking about the dichotomy of farmers in Latin America and Central America and the Caribbean. So,
well, I could take a stab at this. There are, as you know, different categories of farmers within Latin America and the Caribbean. We have very large plantation-type agricultural systems.
I think we need a microphone for Chandra. Can you turn his microphone up? Okay, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. There are a range of small farm systems, let's say, from larger farmers to larger plantation-type farmers to extremely small, vulnerable farmers. Because of this, it's very clear that you have different mechanisms for delivery of institutional support. The larger plantation-type, estate-type farmers can access that technology, they can use that technology. Where we have more of a problem is with respect to the smaller farmers, the landless farmers. And there is where I say, first of all, that we have a weak institutional capacity in the region. And of course, this is something that ICA works with. And one of the things that I am always proud of saying about ICA is that ICA works in the field with farmers. And I think ICA has an immense role to play in being an agent of change, working to increase and improve the technological capacity of our ministries of agriculture that are no doubt weak, for which governments, for whatever reason, have been refusing to make the investments that they need to make in their ministries of agriculture. They just don't put their money where their mouth is in terms of putting the support into the ministries of agriculture. But yet, they pay a lot of lip service to farmers, the need for farmers, but you don't see it in the budgets. Governments have to address that. And I think these are the kind of fora that are important to get governments to start to deal with that lack of investment. We could go to Kenya. Another example there, you have the private sector and government working hand in hand to deliver the kinds of products that Max was talking about with respect to crop insurance. And that again is something that is missing in parts of Latin America and the Caribbean. We don't see that private sector, public sector synergy and partnership coming together that easily. You ask people in the Caribbean, in Latin America, and one of the comments that's made is that the food distribution, manufacturing, and the grocery stores are all in the back pockets of the ministers, prime ministers, politicians, and therefore it's to their benefit to keep that agglomeration going rather than to invest in food production. I don't have any evidence to say whether it's yea or nay, but I think that what is important is that governments need to start to work on that stimulus with the private sector to be able to put together the kinds of products that we're talking about here today. So the challenges are there for sure, but I think the first step is for the governments to realize it and to kickstart those improvements.
For a final question from the audience? This gentleman here.
I'm Marcelo Martinez from the Mission of Brazil to the OAS. It's a slightly different topic. There's been a lot of media coverage on the issue of shale gas exploration. What I wanted to know if, in your experience, are the impacts potentially real, or is it just media hype? Thank you.
Is this directed to any one particular panelist? Okay. Is it with respect to impact on agriculture or energy for agriculture?
To water management.
I'm sorry?
Integrated, well, as directed to integrated water management, water reservoirs. If it's...
So are you asking what is the impact of fracking or shale on water, particularly with respect to agriculture? So
if there is an impact.
Is there an impact that you're seeing in your work on the impact on water for irrigation for agriculture with shale gas extraction?
Well, probably something that we should say is that this issue of fracking is a very new emerging in the Americas, at least the Latin American region. And I know that there are countries like Argentina. I suppose that Brazil is also working a little bit on that. From our point of view, it leads to something that I wanted to mention at the end, but I think that that's important to put it now, is the competing sectors. That's probably one of the more important things that we have to consider, that in order to produce this food for people, we are also people requiring energy, that we have also people requiring potable water. We have also the commerce being increased a lot, so we need a wider canal of Panama, so we need to put more water into that too. So there are so many issues. There are more ships passing by the Caribbean requiring more water too. So the competing sectors is one important factor regarding the integrated water resources management. And that's why I insist on the factor of having a strong governance in order to have the possibility that this water management could be manageable. Now, regarding the specific impact of fracking, I think that is not coming from the sector of the energy. Probably is my view is pretty much biased to the appreciation of the management that we have now without fracking, and as a factor that will demand a lot of water, even though I know that they re-inject water and recycle in some way. But it's the same case that when we have the hydropower and the dams and the reservoirs, because this water is right there, is still, so they cannot be used for other sectors that we probably would require. So in our case, from the position of OAS, I would say that our vision should be toward how this computer sector could reach a level that tensions could be arise, depending on not only on the relationship between countries, but also on the pressure that the global market demands on energy or on water for transportation. So and I think that that's a view that probably we could explore a little bit more. I know that in a country like Brazil, which is related to water, a continent by itself, it could be seen from the position of the states, what the different states would be assuming as a competing factors among them. But for the smaller countries, I don't see that it's still too much fracking has been intended or planning.
Anybody else? Okay, great. Well, I think in interest of time, we need to wrap up, but I want to just again thank our panelists for not only sticking to your time limits, but being such good shares of information with the group, and thank you again for your time and your perspectives, and let's give them a round of applause. And now I believe we're going to turn the next panel over to Kelly Wachowski. Are you going to introduce some of our lightning round presentations? Okay. Thank you, Max. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to everyone on that panel for the really informative presentations. I really really appreciate how you also gave some ideas of how we might move forward, because sometimes the challenges in and of themselves can get quite overwhelming. 70% more food needed by 2050 to feed a population of 9.6 billion people with less resources, approaching ecological limits, in the face of climate change, and with persistent food insecurity and poverty. It sounds like a lot, and that's why I'm really happy to be here to moderate this lightning round, which is focusing on concrete ways the challenges mentioned so far today can be addressed. We have 3 really fascinating speakers, so please hang in there. I know we're a little bit behind, but we'll catch up a bit. So each one of them is going to give a 6-minute presentation on a cutting-edge initiative that's either being piloted or implemented in the Americas. And each of these initiatives brings together technology and innovation, both of which will be necessary if we expect to have the quantity and quality of water necessary for enhanced agricultural production in the future. I'm going to introduce all 3 speakers, and then they'll come up in the order that I mentioned them to give you their presentations, and then we'll have a short time for questions at the end. So Randy Vines will speak first. He's a principal scientist at the Torrey Group with over 25 years of experience related to the study of infectious diseases and biotechnology. He's worked as a government consultant, university member, and industry scientist. He has a doctoral degree in microbiology from the University of Virginia, where his research focused on infectious diseases of developing countries and how to develop and apply new biotech methods to understand disease mechanisms, improve diagnosis, and advance potential therapies and treatments. After that, we'll have Tian Xiao speak. She's a senior associate with the Markets and Enterprise Program at the World Resources Institute. She oversees the design and development of the Aqueduct Information Platform, which is WRI's tool for measuring and mapping water risks for investors. She has a master's in environmental management from Yale and a master's in environmental engineering from Northwestern. Finally, Rick Morris, who is the global agriculture leader responsible for IBM's support and involvement in the agribusiness industry, will speak. He's been part of IBM's sales and consulting sector, covering the USDA for more than 25 years. His expertise in innovative technologies and their use in agriculture, including precision agriculture, genetics, sensor technology, and other information technology tools and their application in the sector. Rick has a business degree from the University of Georgia's Terry School of Business with a double major in both business and industrial location. So with that, I will turn the podium over to Randy, who will speak to you about a really innovative technology involving algae.
Go get the first slide, Kelly. Good afternoon. Just going to wait till we get a couple of slides pulled up. Okay, thank you. My name is Randy Vines. I'm a principal scientist at the Torrey Group. Unfortunately, Dr. Courtney could not be here today. He was called away at the last second, and more unfortunately for me, he was called away at the last second before he had prepared his remarks. So that job fell to me, but it is an honor nonetheless to be here. And I would like to thank Ika and David Hatch for the opportunity to speak to you today on a topic we at Torrey are passionate about: clean water. As the world's population grows over the next 10 years, an already critical situation will become worse as the demand for clean water will further exceed the world's existing supplies, thereby increasing infectious disease risk, decreasing quality of life, and ultimately potentially leading to nation-state instability. When David Hatch and I first met over a year ago, we realized that Ika and the Torrey Group had common goals regarding clean water, sustainable agriculture, and economic development. Today I'm going to give you a brief introduction to one technology that can provide an economically viable, environmentally sound, low-waste option to help solve this problem. This technology is algae farming. And just to be clear, the Torrey Group does not own this technology. I'm not here to sell you something. I'm here to educate, discuss, learn, and hopefully facilitate progress in this area. Next slide, please. There. This algae farming method I'm going to describe is applicable to a wide-ranging size of agricultural operations. It employs a system designed to flow water over a shallow spillway that is approximately 5 to 8 centimeters deep. The design of the spillway, that is where the water flows, is very flexible and can be adapted for specific individual needs. In a short time, as the water flows over the spillway, it becomes covered with algae that are native to the water source. And importantly, as the algae grow, they clean the water. The water source for algae farming can either be flowing or still waters, such as a pond or lake. Flowing water can move itself over the spillway. For still waters, pumps are used to create a flow, and in fact, solar-powered pumps have been used for this purpose. This technology was first developed over 20 years ago, and its feasibility and benefits are well documented. It is in use today. Shown in the slides, or in the photos rather, are 3 implementations of the technology. In the middle, Dr. Patrick Kangas, one of our collaborators, is shown here at an algae farming research site. If you'll notice the relatively simple nature of the system, at this site, Dr. Kangas had put down a layer of basically plastic that created the trough that had a small screen in it on which the algae could grow. Yes. This project of Dr. Kangas's gathered information on the benefits of the technology for both algae farming and the water source. To the left is another small-scale research-driven operation used to demonstrate the utility of the system to clean a contaminated harbor. At the back of the photo, the water was pumped into a trough, and in this time the trough was several, 18 or 20 inches off of the ground, made of plywood, and again had its small screen in it. The water was pumped in at one end, it flowed down a 1 to 2% grade, and the cleaned water came out the other end and was returned to the harbor. And at the other end of the scale, a larger facility of approximately 2 hectares processing 38 million liters of water per day is a critical component to that particular region's water remediation efforts. This site, the one shown on the right photo, produces several tons of dry biomass per week. So because algae grow wherever there are relatively warm temperatures and sunlight, and therefore do not compete, they do not compete with agriculturally important crops, and they can use contaminated or impaired water as they grow. Next slide, please. Thank you. The 2 primary products from this system then are clean water and biomass. As a result of the algal growth, nutrients such as phosphorus and nitrogen are removed from the water, and carbon dioxide is captured from the air. The resulting water also contains more oxygen and has an increased pH, both of which can help reduce the number of potentially harmful bacteria that may be present in the water. Sediment is also removed from the water during this process. The improved water quality also leads to more diverse aquatic life. The algae are harvested frequently, and the biomass is ready to be used directly or dried and processed into the desired end product. So the algae are just periodically removed from the trough by a squeegee, by hand, by a wet vac, or actually in the larger systems there are basically tractors that can remove the algae from the system. In any way, the algae is collected and can be used as is or dried and then processed. So shown on the next slide are some of the value-added products from the biomass that can help make this an environmentally sound technology that is also economically viable. Next slide, please. After the algal biomass has been harvested, it can be used on the land as a fertilizer or soil amendment. That is, it can be applied directly to the soil. We and others have analyzed the biomass in terms of its nutritional content. The biomass can have a high protein and carbohydrate content, making it very high value animal feed. In fact, depending on the actual conditions at the site, the biomass may need to be cut or diluted to make it acceptable as an animal feed. The biomass has been fed directly to the animals, but also the algae can be milled into a flour that can then be pelletized and fed to various livestock in that form. You may have well heard about the use of algae as a biofuel. Indeed, algae can be processed to remove oils that can be made into biodiesel, biogasoline, bioethanol, and other biofuels. However, native algae, which is what this system uses, only the algae that were there at the start in the water source are what grows, may or may not yield the high oil content we often hear about in relation to biofuels. But it does remain a possibility given an individual site. Perhaps more useful to a farmer would be the use of the algae in an anaerobic digester, where microorganisms can be used to break down the biomass and in the process produce biogas such as methane that can be used for fuel, for equipment on the farm, or perhaps even sold. Algae have also been used as a starting material in bioplastics, thereby replacing the need for petroleum in the process. Next slide, please. So in summary, this relatively easy to implement, potentially low-cost technology can provide an environmentally sound, economically viable solution to clean the water. You end up with clean water that has reduced phosphorus, reduced nitrogen, reduced sediment, increased oxygen, increased pH, and overall creates a better habitat for aquaculture. And on the other side, you end up with biomass that can be used as a soil amendment, as fertilizer, as animal feed, as biofuel, or perhaps as a bioplastic starting material. So in summary, we feel strongly that this technology provides a low-cost, potentially low investment way to recover our valuable resource. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for staying, and thank you, Ika, for the opportunity to present our work. I do have slides as well, so I'll wait for them. Great. So for those of you who don't know the World Resources Institute, we are an environmental think tank, and we have 250 people, and we have offices all over the world, in Beijing and in Bangalore, India, and now one in Brazil as well. We're based in Washington, D.C., but generally we are doing objective research and trying to drive change on the ground through that research. So today, what I'm going to do is to go over one of our projects called the Aqueduct Project and how we've applied it to look at agricultural risk globally, and some solutions, and finally some questions and answers. Okay, so I went over what WRI is, but we really work at the intersection between people and their environment. And this is Aqueduct. It's a measuring and mapping and communicating water risk tool. It's high resolution, it's comprehensive, and it is up to date as well. It's an interactive mapping tool that is publicly available and pretty user-friendly. I really recommend going and trying it out. What we do is we bring satellite data and water supply models from NASA, and then we also take water use information that's available globally and spatial data of irrigated land, population density, and industrial nightlights to push the information down from a country level to a watershed level. So what we have are maps that are providing information for 15,000 catchments around the world. That's pretty granular. What we do also is to bring together comprehensive water risk information through 12 different indicators of water risk. Some of these indicators of water risk, and I won't go through all of them, include water stress, supply variability, floods, droughts, groundwater stress, and also proxies for water quality and proxies for regulatory and reputational risk. These 12 indicators are grouped into 3 categories of water risk and then also aggregated up so that we have an overall water risk map as well. We do try to build on existing science, and so we have an expert advisory group made out of academics and nonprofit organizations advising us on the data and methodology and the framework. We also have an alliance of companies because much of this work initially was as a result of demand from companies and investors, and so they have really helped us make this map applicable to the private sector. But as I will go through later on through my presentation, it's also very applicable for the public sector as well. So one thing I wanted to mention on this slide is, in addition to the 12 different indicators of water risk, we're also working on a set of projected water stress map to 2020, 2030, 2040, and 2050. And this is based on the latest IPCC scenarios. So we will be projecting water supply using climate change scenarios and also water demand using the socioeconomic scenarios within the IPCC, the newest IPCC report. So this is one of the maps in Aqueduct project. This is a baseline water stress, and you can see this is total water withdrawal over renewable water supply. And renewable water supply here is looking at renewable water supply taking out upstream consumptive use. And areas here where it's red or dark red is where the percentage of withdrawal is greater than 40% of the available water supply. And so areas of red here are where you can see greater competition between water use. And also areas of yellow, you'll see lower levels of competition between water use. That's about 10% of water withdrawal over renewable water supply. So here I wanted to showcase, yes, we have these comprehensive maps and they're easy to use. And about 80,000 users have downloaded this information since our launch in January, but how can it be applied? So I wanted to focus on a region of interest for this group. And so we did some mapping of Brazil, where Brazil, the background is there's 12% of the global freshwater in Brazil, and however the resource is really unevenly distributed across the country and not located in areas of high population. Around 50% of the water in Brazil is found in the Amazon River Basin, is to the left of this map, but that's only where about 4% of the population lives. About 80% of the population is on the east coast, about 100 kilometers from the Atlantic Ocean. So this uneven distribution of water resources requires a lot of transporting and producing drinking water to the Brazil's east coast to the high population areas, and then transporting that water back into the west to redirect the water resources. So this is, we wanted to show that even though Brazil, if you look at this map, baseline water stress is not very high for Brazil, if we go back to the global map. However, if you look at what's the water stress for the population, where the population are in the east, you'll see that about 45% of Brazil's population is in medium to high water stressed areas, and that includes the major cities such as Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and Fortaleza. It's the same thing, we did a very similar analysis looking at the floods using our flood maps, and here we've seen that Brazil has seen an increase in extreme weather, and so we try to highlight that the population density is facing quite a bit of flood risks. About 4 million people in Brazil cities of 1 million or more people are exposed to high flood risks. So not just water stress, but we also wanted to show you other water risks that our maps can show for specifically for Brazil. And here we see that many parts of Brazil have medium to extremely high interannual variability. So interannual variability is the water supply variation between years, and also seasonal variability or variation in water supply between months of a year. And then the map on the very right is an upstream storage map, and this requires a little bit of explanation, but it really measures water storage capacity of a local area relative to the water supply of that location. So areas of pale yellow indicate areas that are better able to buffer variations in water supply, and areas in red are not as able to buffer supply. So in addition to looking at what we try to do recently is to see if we can use our maps to take a look at what are the threats to agriculture globally. And so we're using our maps recently to learn more about water stress and how that threatens agriculture. And I wanted to show you a few maps that we've produced. This map shows using the aqueduct data of water use really shows that the majority of water use is by agriculture, about 70%, and many speakers have mentioned that today. And but what is also interesting is if you look at consumptive use, and you'll see that agriculture is biggest, about 90% of the total total consumptive user is from agriculture. So, and we know consumption is water use that is not returned to the location due to evaporation or incorporation to other products. So this really has a real impact on the environment. Another map that we took a look at is looking at total cropland and overlaid that on water stress map, and here you can see that 1/4 of the world's agriculture grown is in high to extremely high water stress areas. So this means that anywhere in the red signals that there's competition for water for any given area, and the darkest red areas are definitely the most vulnerable areas. Maps like these, and I wanted to show our tool and these overlays, is because it really can highlight critical hotspots and help raise awareness and identify potential food disruption and conflict. So we did this analysis of water stress, not just total cropland, but for 20 major commodities around the world. And so basically you can see that different crops face different levels of water stress in different regions. And this is a very high level analysis, but we can also look at this by our catchments as well and find this information. This is one of our indicators that I hadn't shown you before, but this is a picture of groundwater abstraction rates. And if you look at this map, you'll see that areas of high groundwater extraction is also key agricultural areas. And so definitely another trend that we can take a look using this map. So one of the things WRI is working on is to see what are the solutions. WRI has a World Resources Report that we published every year. And this year is on the World Food Gap. And a speaker had mentioned that there's going to be a 70% food gap in the coming years. And so there are many solutions highlighted in this report. And I just wanted to touch on them quickly because all these solutions are also solutions that may reduce water use as well. So some of these are increasing crop productivity due to better soil and water management, reducing food waste, shifting to healthier diets, reducing biofuel demand, and reaching replacement level fertility. So finally, I wanted to highlight this website because these are agricultural water stress maps, and it's interactive and freely available, and it really can identify the hot spots of potential food production and potential areas of stress for agriculture as well. So thank you for your time.
Good afternoon. My name is Rick Morris. I'm with IBM. I'm IBM's agribusiness leader, responsible for IBM's participation in agribusiness. And I'm here today to talk about a project we're working on in South Georgia. And I had a few slides. I don't know if you want to go to the next slide. I can kind of explain a little bit about the project we're doing down there. The product that we're using in agriculture is a product called Deep Thunder. It's not a new product. It's a weather prediction system. And it has the ability to predict weather. I think we're using down in the Flint River Basin, the area in southwest Georgia that we're using it in agriculture, to predict weather with 90% accuracy within 2 to 3 days. So this is hyper-localized weather prediction that's helping farmers do their operations better by knowing what the weather is going to be like even a mile away from where they are with 90% accuracy. So when you think about that, you think about whether it's time to plant, whether it's time to harvest, whether it's time to apply fertilizers or pesticides. All that depends on weather. And if I can be sure that I'm going to have particular weather conditions with 90% accuracy, it does a lot for my ability to operate my farm and increase my production. So we're working with a group down in southwest Georgia. It's called the Team Flint River, and it consists of the Nature Conservancy, USDA, University of Georgia, IBM, and a local conservation group in southwest Georgia. And what we're trying to do is, they're highly sophisticated. This area in southwest Georgia has very sandy soil, but it's an agriculture powerhouse. So they're #1 producer in the U.S. in peanuts and sweet corn, one of the major producers of cotton, etc. So they have a wide variety of crops too. So they're highly dependent on irrigation and irrigation systems. If you go to the next slide, they have pivot irrigation systems down there in about 6,000 acres of land. So they're highly dependent on water usage out of a aquifer and river system called the Flint River Basin. And years ago they had what they would call the water wars down in the area of southwest Georgia, Alabama, and Florida, where they were using tremendous amounts of water for irrigation of agriculture, and had difficulties, like the Colorado River, water usage. Georgia's using all the water. I'm not getting it in Florida. I'm not getting it in Alabama. Well, again, they looked into ways where they could cut down the water usage, and one of the ways was variable rate irrigation. It's systems that water in certain areas that need it. And so they turned to sensor technology, soil sensors, to tell you how much water was in the soil. And they started using that system, and they were able to save gallons and gallons of water and increase their productivity. They decided, I don't know how it all came about, but they decided, boy, if we could have weather prediction tied into this, that would be great. So we set up Deep Thunder down there. Deep Thunder started, again, a while ago. It was first used in the Atlanta Olympics to predict weather down there for venues so that they could reschedule different events depending on the weather. And over the years, it's been used at airports and other countries for different purposes. And I think it'll be used in the Olympics in Rio coming up to, again, use it as a determiner of events, scheduling, etc. But is this the first time that it's really been used strictly for agriculture? It's been used as part of a Smarter Cities initiative where they're trying to predict weather in places that get wide variations in weather. But down in South Georgia, farmers needed to know when it was going to rain. If you take the cotton crop, for example, you can't harvest cotton when it's wet. So you need to know, is it going to rain tomorrow or the next day? We're expanding the scope of this Deep Thunder system so we can predict weather within 3 days with 90% accuracy of where it's going to rain, or if it's going to freeze, or if it's going to be windy. So it's the only system I know that's out there being used in agriculture that has this hyper precision accompanied with it. So now we're going to take it to the next stage where we're going to tie it to the sensor data that's coming in that a lot of the farmers have down there. And these farmers are pretty big. Some of them are like 10,000 acres. So there are a lot of large farms, and then there's a lot of small farms. We have about 15 farmers using this weather prediction system today. And so the next phase is to tie these moisture sensors, and they're getting cheap these days, out in the fields, and then tying it to the weather prediction so that we can give a decision support system to the farmers out there to tell them when, where to water, etc. If you go to the next slide, I can kind of give you an illustration of this. We can give them, again, decision support, telling them, we go to the next slide, thank you. Here it is. On, I guess it's your left, you can see all the inputs that Deep Thunder is getting. And then it's tying it to the weather, the soil sensors, and then it's doing the analytics, and it's delivering data via mobile phones or your PC on your kitchen table or whatever it is where you're gathering that data as a producer, a farmer, and determining where you're going to water, when you're going to water. The pivot systems is cutting down on a number of things. If you look at the right slide there, it'll show a field with an area of red where, again, it's under irrigated, needs water. So again, we're trying to use, as part of a larger initiative called precision agriculture. So we're trying to get as many data points as we can, analyze them, analytics, big data, analytics, and then prescriptive analytics that tell a farmer what to do, when to do it, and how to run his operation. So if you go to the next slide on there, again, it kind of describes some of the benefits they're realizing. It's a number of areas. They're cutting down on water. We predict another 10%. They've already saved, I think, cut down their water usage by 15%. We predict another 10%. They're cutting down on their inputs, meaning if I go out and fertilize 100 acres, 500 acres, whatever, and it rains the next day, I've lost all that fertilizer. If I use pesticides, same case, I've lost it all. So they're going to cut down on inputs, and then running the pivots. They have these pivots that can go out for 3/4 of a mile. They're irrigation systems that go out and water the different parts of the field on one large pipe system, which I'm sure you've all seen. And it takes fuel to run those things. So if I can cut down on my use of the pivots and the water usage, I'm cutting down on the fuel I need to run those things, which get to be pretty expensive. And a number of other areas that I'm cutting down on, meaning loss of fertilizer, pesticides, herbicides, etc. So, and last but not least is the water usage. Again, this Flint River Basin is a sensitive ecological area where there's the most species, I think, of reptiles and amphibians at any place in the U.S. And they were dying off because of the water table going down so much. And in the last few years, the water tables have gone up. We expect them to go up more, and we expect to tie together, again, this system of using soil sensors, variable rate irrigation, and then other data too, nitrate sensors, et cetera, to give the farmers a decision support system that they can use. We almost envision it as being almost like a cables or cell phones for a lot of us, meaning it's a service they will not be able to do without in the future. It'll help them run their farms. It'll help them increase their productivity. I think one of the estimates is even a 10% increase down in that area produces about 70 million more in income for the farmers in that Flint River Valley Basin. So that's what we're doing in agriculture with this product called Deep Thunder. We expect to, again, use the analytics and expand from there. We're talking to the University of Georgia to put their irrigation systems together with our weather data and do the analytics to come up with answers for the farmers in that region. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. And I appreciate your time this afternoon. Thank you.
Okay, we'll just take a few minutes here if there's one or two burning questions from the audience. None?
Yes, okay, thank you very much. I think that these presentations are very, very illustrative. And in particular, my question is for the last presenter regarding the input model that is necessary to have all this process running. And I'm interested in the weather type of and in the climate type of. That's two different approaches. I also recognize that there has been some efforts, especially in Latin America, and Central America, and the Caribbean, regarding climate outlooks that give you also the perspective of 3 months or the seasonality, which for the farmers is also very important to as an input for all this process. So that would be the question.
Project going on in California in a winery that is not using Deep Thunder weather prediction, but is using GIS and other weather inputs and variable rate irrigation systems, and are producing, I think the crop yield has increased 20%, better crops, better grapes, and I think 15% less water usage. So across the board, there are a number of projects. And the other thing that we're also looking at down in southwest Georgia is hyperspectral imaging, where instead of using satellite data that doesn't get precise enough, we use these cameras. And of course, twice and leaves, etc. So that's the next step that we're going to be working on down here to get better imaging and as many data points as we can get. There's a lot of places where you can collect data on the farm. And I think agriculture is turning into data. And I think you've probably seen the reports where the big data and analytics give you the results that you need to better run your farming operation. And of course, mobile technology, that's another big piece of this too.
I'm very impressed that a company like IBM would apply its resources and technology and expertise to the monitoring of agricultural systems, requirements of agricultural systems, weather variability, and I expect great things from a company like IBM. So I wish to express my admiration and respect for this development. Thank you.
I will say that the main area of research that IBM is doing in agriculture is in the Haifa lab in Israel. So, okay, that's where a lot of our R&D is coming from in agriculture. So, and of course, we have people up in our Yorktown Heights research area too that are working on this. So, you know, agriculture is a $3 trillion industry, but it's not just the money. It's helping the little farmers and the big agribusinesses. So, and there's other projects too. We talked about it. I don't want to get off subject here, but crop advisory services. I think there were questions about how do you get the information to people that are out in India and Africa. Well, there's projects going on right now that IBM is involved in where they're using their mobile phones, which has a higher penetration rates of mobile phones in places in Africa and India than they do in the US. So they can get this data, they can ask questions, send it to a central location, take a picture of the leaves and say, what disease is this? What do I put on it? You know, what seeds should I use? What should I grow here? What gives me the most money for my investment when I grow something? These are crop advisory services, and it also plays into this precision agriculture system that they're trying to create. And you've probably heard more and more about that recently. A lot of the big agribusinesses are getting into precision agriculture, meaning I want to provide a service to the farmers, the growers out there to help them produce more and reduce their inputs to farming. So, thank you.
I just want to finish up with one last question, particularly for Randy and Tien, regarding how you scale up, you know, these technologies, or how do you expand the use in the case of the global water risk maps, and what are the roles of the different stakeholders, the different stakeholders in the value chain need to take to help you do that?
Thanks for the question. WRI, we recently had a strategy refresh, and so everything we do, we want to make sure it's scalable. And so even if we do pilot tests for specific river basins, for countries, we have to think about how to make it global. So when we first started with the mapping, we mapped river basins around the world, 6 river basins, but we're also realizing because our primary audience at that time were companies, water-intensive companies, that they needed information that was more comparable and global. And so we took our lessons learned from collecting data and coming up with indicators of risk at the river basin level, and then for 6 different river basins, and then pull that up to the global level and to make sure that the framework was applicable globally. So now we are going back the other way, and we're working with our colleagues in Beijing and China to do country level maps, and also in India for India level maps, but that was our strategy.
So, as I hope the photographs illustrated, the algae technology is totally scalable in terms of size. It can be very simple, you know, a just small system, or the rather large system that has concrete infrastructure. So you can scale it on size, but we also envision it being scaled in number as this catches on in a given area. So as one farmer implements this system, we hope that the knowledge is transferred to the local farmers, the local government, and they say, I'd like to get some of that. And so then the thing catches on and scale that way. But our big goal is to transfer the knowledge to the locals so that they can implement this on their own.
So as I asked Miguel to come up to give the final summary of the day, I'd like to ask for a round of applause for these speakers and the exciting technologies they presented.
Thank you so much. My name is Miguel Garcia. I work for the agribusiness unit in ICA. And I have given a big challenge, and that's to try to summarize what we have heard today. And I have two major challenges to start. The first one is that being a native Spanish-speaking native people, I had to come to West Virginia to learn my English, and now I had perfection that in Miami. So I may speak between Spanglish and Portuñol. So to our translators, this is going to be a major challenge. And the second challenge that I have is to try to summarize all this amount of knowledge in a city that normally closes at 5 o'clock, and I think it's 5:05. I'm between you and the cocktail. I know you want to save some water, so wine seems to be a good option. But in summarizing and trying to make an effort, I think that looking at water, we're talking an issue that is very sensitive. It's an issue that goes beyond agriculture. It's an issue that goes to the basic existence of the planet Earth. And since many, many centuries ago, we have recognized the interdependence between water and the survival of Earth and the civilization. And I think we think this is new, but it's not new. The only thing that is new is that we don't do something fast and effective. The future of our children and Earth is in true peril. So I think that's the urgency, and that's the big difference. And if I had to finish the message at this particular time, I would say we need to do something fast and urgently. But looking about agriculture, I think we had to do something step by step. And how do we move forward? Well, we can move forward on issues of water for society, the competition between agriculture and other activities. But I think that in our case, talking about the Americas, talking about the future of water in agriculture, the first thing that we need to do is to try to convince, to bring the governments together, to act together, to act with a common goal. And I'm glad we are here. Probably, I hope the walls and this room can absorb your words, and tomorrow where the politicians and the people who make the decisions can come back and spell the words and say, guys, you need to act together. In the Americas, we need to act together. And I think as part of the Institute, we are proposing that we need to concentrate our efforts in 4 major areas. In 4 major areas that will transform the use of water in agriculture, that will increase the efficiency of water in agriculture. The first area that we want to work is how do we strengthen the governance and the governability of water, and how do we strengthen the ministers of agriculture leadership role in providing some new paradigms for the use of water in agriculture. Unless we all work together to strengthen the ministers of agriculture, their leadership, their position within the government, to improve water in agriculture, agriculture will continue to be behind the curve on water. The second thing is we need to continue to stress the need to improve the integral management of our natural resources, in which water is only one of them. Unless we change the paradigms, unless we use some of these technologies that you saw right now, the technologies of special information and management, unless we do that, then we will continue to be behind for the next 50 years. The other thing that we need to do is to continue to stress for innovation. If we don't look at the innovation, and innovation not only on water irrigation systems, we need to think about innovations on the development of new biological products. How do plants use water? Is that a product of biotechnology or general genetics? How do animals use water? How do soils use water? We can really also need innovation on organizations. How do farmers organize themselves? How irrigations groups work together? How do we train irrigation? That we need innovation in that areas. We need innovations at the farm level. How do we bring precision agriculture? How do we improve your improvements on drip irrigations? We need to continue to work on that. How do we work on water basins? How do we work on countries and regions? So I think innovation is the next step. And finally, I think we need to improve capacity. And I think the capacity needs to be improved in 3 levels. First, the people who use the water. We need to find ways to get to the farmer, ways to get to the producer, ways to create the capacity for people to understand the relationship between water, plants and animals, soils, and the atmosphere and the environment. If we don't do that and we don't increase that capacity, we continue the risk to be behind. And I think, John, you were very clear on saying, unless the people who use the water knows how to improve the water, we will never have food for the future. The second thing is we need to create a new set of professionals. The agronomists, the people that work in the environment, cannot continue to be trained in the way we were trained 15 years ago, 20 years ago. We need new paradigms. We need new professionals that can understand science at the basic levels, that can understand the needs of the producers and the industry, but also they have a very clear social and environmental conscience. And I think that's a challenge for the universities. We need to change and shake the way the universities in our countries are working. And finally, I think we need to work with women. Women are key and central for the sustainability of water and of natural resources. And unless we are able to transform women in total and complete social human beings with no restrictions over men, we continue to risk of destroying our natural resources. So I think that's the way that we need to move forward. And since I work for ICA, I think ICA has to be your partners of choice. Why we have to be the partner of choice? I think we are the partner of choice for several reasons. One, we are a young institution, only 72 years working on the field. There is no other institution in the Americas that had that expertise. And if there is, I invite them to join with us, because then will be 150 years of experience. Second, I think ICA has a network of offices in the entire continent. No other institution has that power. And third, I think ICA has a tremendous technical capacity. So the way to move forward is to continue to promote the leadership of the Ministers of Agriculture, to promote the integral management of our natural resources, to promote innovation, to enhance capacity and human development, and partner with a leader institution that is ICA. So David, I leave you these words, and hopefully we continue to work together. Thank you so much.
Well, if Miguel he thinks he's the last one between us and the reception, he's wrong. I am. And so we will make this really very, very short. First of all, there are many, many people to thank. And first of all, we'd love to thank OAS and for all of their support. We have a special relationship with them, and this is a beautiful setting. Those of you who are joining us via webcast, we wish you could be here to enjoy this setting and to enjoy the refreshments that will come afterwards. We would also like to thank all the participants. Dr. Hillel, his wife, those of you who came for so far a distance, Senor Girona, and certainly Sandra Matamutu from Canada, and all of those who have dedicated themselves to making this event very special and very successful. And I cannot close without thanking our staff here in Washington for all of their dedication and work in this regard. They worked really very tirelessly to make this happen. We appreciate Lloyd Day's presence here on behalf of the Director General of ICA. And we hope that those comments that Miguel made and that we've heard today that you will do something with these thoughts and with these comments, with these ideas, and share them and begin to get a dialogue going within your own organizations. And as Miguel said, ICA stands ready to move forward with you in any way that we can, and we would operate with the idea that we would explore collaboration and see what we can do together. For those of you who are listening and all of you here today, the presentations will be found on ICA's US website, which is www.iica.int. If you go to that home page in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see a blue section where you can scroll down and find the Office of the United States, and there will be our website. And you can find the office in every country, and so if you are interested in looking to see what ICA is doing in El Salvador, or Guatemala, or Guyana, or whatever you'd like, you can find that information out at that website. So we thank you very, very much for coming tonight, and let's give all the participants, please, one more round of applause.